It's time now for the exchange. Joining us is Toby Harward, Principal Situation Coordinator in Darfur for the UN's Refugee Agency. Toby, good to have you on the show with us. The vast majority of these displaced people and refugees are women and children. Can you just give us a sense of what you're hearing they've experienced?
Yeah, well, thank you, Julia, for this opportunity to talk to you. I mean, just before we get into that, I just want to set out the scale of this catastrophic humanitarian situation that is ongoing in Sudan. In 11 weeks of fighting, we have now seen more than 2,600,000 newly displaced persons. That's more than 2.1 million displaced internally in Sudan, and more than 600,000 who have fled across borders into neighboring countries, Egypt, Chad, South Sudan, Ethiopia, Central African Republic, many of whom have their own very difficult humanitarian situations. But in very large numbers, as you rightly say, of these displaced persons are women and children. Some reports from Chad have up to 80% of numbers of refugees being women and children who are being forced out of their homes as a result of the fighting between the two warring parties. UNHCR and our partners, UN agencies and other NGOs, are doing whatever we can to scale up protection activities, but it is astonishingly difficult due to the lack of access, lack of telecommunications, lack of fuel, and indeed our own national staff and partners have had to flee in many cases for their own safety. But for women and girls in particular, you will have seen the press statement put out by senior UN officials. We are extremely concerned about the huge spike in sexual violence against women and girls. It is an absolutely abhorrent terror tactic used by the warring parties against civilians. And certainly there's a very strong call from the senior UN officials on this to stop, on prevention mechanisms to be put into place, and for accountability to be held against those fighters, criminals and bandits who are responsible for this huge rise in sexual violence.
How much worse might this get, Toby? Do you have a sense of scale of how many more refugees we might see, whether it's internally displaced or fleeing to other nations? Because these numbers are staggering, but if the violence continues, one has to assume this is only going to get worse, much worse.
I'm afraid to say, Julia, I think you're exactly right. UNHCR is having to scale up our refugee response figures significantly, and it certainly looks as if now, despite the various intermittent ceasefires, most of which do not hold, that the fighting is escalating into areas not just within Khartoum and Darfur, where the primary fighting has been, but also into areas to the north and to the south of Khartoum. And this will have, if this continues in this way, if the parties do not look towards ceasing this conflict, it will again lead to many, many more thousands, hundreds of thousands, possibly more, refugees and IDPs. It's an untenable situation that needs urgent international attention.
Can you give us a sense of what conditions are like in some of these refugee camps too? I mean, I was just looking at some of the details of what's happening in the state of White Nile and the concerns about a measles outbreak there. Do you have any information that you can give us on that?
Yes, well, the Doctors Without Borders has already reported 13 child deaths in one of the camps in White Nile state. We've had outbreaks of measles in other areas, including in Alayt, a major refugee encampment in North Darfur. And we are also extremely concerned about, now with the arrival of the rainy season, the onset of waterborne diseases, including cholera and obviously malaria, to say nothing of the increasing malnutrition that many refugees are facing. In some areas, our colleagues and partners from WFP have not been able to go into refugee camps for them to receive critical food assistance. So we do expect rising levels of malnutrition. It's altogether, we are extremely concerned that again, the threats within refugee camps, within IDP camps of diseases will only get worse if we are unable to have the humanitarian access to get medication, wash items, nutrition, and food into the more vulnerable areas.
Toby, what I hear time and time again in humanitarian crises like this is a challenge in raising money and support to try and help. And I've seen just in recent days that there's just a fraction of the requests for support that's so far been raised. What can people do that are watching this? What can they provide? How can they help if they want to?
Well, I mean, as of now, UNHCR's regional refugee response program is only 13% funded. I mean, there are obviously donation pages on UNHCR's website, as there are, I should say, on other key UN agencies and other partners' websites. But I mean, there are critical INGOs carrying out phenomenal work under enormous risk to their staff. Who are getting into some of these places. But again, it's astonishingly difficult to do that. But funding for both the Sudan crisis, and I would also point out the huge numbers of refugees that have passed across the border into Chad in recent weeks. I'm the principal situation coordinator for Darfur, UNHCR in Darfur. So the vast majority of refugees from West Darfur, where there have been some horrific fighting and displacement going on, have gone into Chad. And Chad authorities have been doing a phenomenal job in working to support refugees who have arrived en masse in the eastern part of Chad, and UNHCR and WFP and other UN agencies are responding as far as we possibly can there. But more support is vital for both the Sudan operation, for the regional response program, and the Chad operation. South Sudan, I should say too, as well. We all need support as we battle to respond to the best of our capacities.
Toby, great to have you on and to help us understand what's taking place there, and thank you to you and your team for the vitally important work you're doing. Toby Harward there. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Julia.